Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Hourlings Podcast Project. My name is Martin Wilsey. I'm your host. But tonight, Jeffrey's going to be driving the bus. Jeffrey, take it away.
Okay, Marty, good to talk to you. As my friends, the pandas, the red pandas, the red raccoons are saying, they're talking. It's dialogue. And that's the discussion of topic today. So guys, dialogue. If you write screenplays, you're all dialogue. But if you're writing a book, it has to have more than just that. But then the question becomes, when do you do dialogue? And that's the first thing I want to ask. When is it needed? How much is needed? And how much is too much dialogue? Shay, what do you think?
I'm a big believer in white space in your manuscript. There should be a lot of white space. Meaning that your paragraphs are broken up with a lot of dialogue. So I think that dialogue is part of a seesaw of balance between action, narrative, and dialogue. And so there is a balance you have to strike, like you said, but go for that white space and avoid big, meaty blocks of paragraphs that are not broken, say for special occasions that are not broken up. That's a visual cue that you need to get some characters talking.
Yeah, I agree with Shay also. I think that it's really important to have balance with your dialogue. And if you have too much exposition, you're missing opportunities. If you don't have enough exposition and too much dialogue, it can cause imbalances the other way too.
So I think dialogue is your best way to basically reveal character and to reveal interactions between characters, how they feel about each other, and to reveal how basically those characters, that back and forth between characters, that's your best way to show it. However, I'm going to take odds with the idea. I agree that in general there should be balance, but there are some famous mystery novels by Gregory MacDonald. Fletch was a series of mystery novels that were written almost entirely in dialogue, which was a neat trick.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's a really good example. Now, the thing about dialogue, though, is that you can have a lot of dialogue one after another, what I call the A-B structure. A talks to B, talks to A, talks to B, talks to B, to A, rather. And it's a good way of building a rhythm. But if you do that too long, the reader might get confused if you don't have a nice little help word called said. But there's the question. Is said okay? Should you be using said? Because if I recall correctly, Stephen King said if there was one word he could eliminate from a book, it would be the word said.
We have to clarify though, are you talking about, is said good with as a dialogue tag, as opposed to different types of dialogue tags, like boomed or roared? Or are you saying that we should eliminate said and just have the dialogue stand on its own, maybe with an action tag?
That's an open question. I mean, I did ask it specifically for said. Yes, you can use other dialogue tags. You can do that, but are you going to encapsulate emotions through the verb, or are you going to describe the emotions through other actions?
You were just talking about the A-B structure, right?
Yeah.
If you do that long enough, then yeah, your reader will get confused after a while. Or at least a little bit tired of that continuous. So yeah, you do need a said to break it up. So yeah, I would say in that example, of course. And I will say that said is better than any other fancy dialogue tag that you want to use, because the eye has been trained to just float right over it and really speed along. So said, I believe, is your best option if you're going to use a dialogue tag. If not, an action tag is maybe even better.
Right.
I kind of disagree with that for a very specific reason.
Fight me.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I think that you shouldn't overuse said, you can use it occasionally. I believe in mixed. If you are planning on doing audio editions of your book, it is very monotonous if a narrator is constantly saying he said, she said, he said, over and over and over and over again, only said. Some authors only use said. And I have listened to audiobooks that after a while, it just drives you crazy because of all the saids that are said. And So I'm a big believer in mixing it up. I definitely do not like when dialogue happens that has no dialogue tags and just presumes the reader's going to know who's speaking. I like that. So I believe in dialogue tags always, unless it is very clear who is speaking. And I like mixing them up, not just said. I like using tags because the tag itself, you can help the reader establish the voice as they're reading it. You know, it's a whole different thing where, you know, if you add "he whispered" instead of "he said,"
Right.
The voice in the reader's head can be modulated using the right dialogue tags.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
I have a couple of perspectives. I feel like there's a few questions buried in here. So the first I'm going to deal with is, I think good dialogue is like a conversation with all the fluff left out. So you're not trying to simulate a real conversation. You're trying to simulate an interesting conversation with all the boring stuff gone. So that's the first thing. The second thing with a series of dialogue, I think you try to start the conversation as late as you can and get out of it as soon as you can. So I think that gives you some focus on how much you should cover in your dialogue. And then finally on the said, I believe in varying the amount of dialogue, varying the size of the paragraphs, adding some variation to the tags, but sometimes you don't even need the tags if you mix them up with action beats. She
Right.
looked off in the distance.
Oh, yeah.
I'm never going to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so by virtue of that, you know who spoke. You don't need a tag because action conveys that. So I think there's a bunch of things that you can do here with dialogue.
And that conveys a lot better in audiobook.
Oh, yeah.
Way better.
I mean, that is generally how I write, and that kind of answers a second question that I had. Indeed, what can you do instead? And as Shay pointed out, you can do whisper and roar and bellow and all of those other things.
Sob.
In YA, it was always
Yeah.
murmur. For some reason, characters were always murmuring.
Right,
YA.
right. The parentheticals in the teleplays and all that. But as David just points out, and I do prefer as a writer, I prefer to say no said, no cry if possible, nothing like that. I will occasionally, but just no said. But almost always, such and such, John wiped his brow. And now you know it was John because in the same paragraph, just after the dialogue appeared, you know it's John doing that. So therefore it was John speaking.
But I think some things are required. So for instance, if I'm shouting is not I said.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will give that some thought. Yeah,
You know,
but it's mainly just said for the sake of said. No, I can always do action instead.
now
That's
there's full of thought for purists. And who was it? I think Cormac McCarthy, the guy that wrote The Road,
Yeah.
as a purist. He's like, you shouldn't need tags at all. Your voices should be so distinct that anybody can just read what's said and know which character said it.
Right.
I'm not a purist. I'm a practical guy, and I think the reader should not be lost. They should have clarity about who's speaking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's kind of an interesting exercise. You know, put the tags in afterwards, but it's kind of an interesting exercise to see if you can do dialogue.
Well, because
without tags, voice is recognized.
Absolutely. That is a very important thing to notice as a writer, because sometimes we as writers have characters that sound the same, and make sure your characters have distinct voices. I believe we've covered that in other podcasts, and so I'm not going to cover it here. But just make sure your characters have unique voices that are distinct, that hopefully you don't need the dialogue tags, but you should have at least something to distinguish, especially in long, repetitive sequences.
My favorite example is Star Wars. Leia said, I love you.
Right.
You don't need a tag to know who said, I know.
Right. Exactly. But that does bring up an interesting topic, because how do you write the engaging dialogue, the dialogue that makes you just want to turn the page?
Well, I always read it out loud.
Yeah.
I think it's a key tool to use. I use a lot of text to voice tools that read it to me. I actually literally sit in my office talking to myself in various characters' voices, and I'm glad nobody's watching me because they think I was purely insane, especially by the things I'm saying. And I don't mind if my cat looks at me funny, but it's really important tool to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, Bailey
dialogue ends up on Post-it notes or in the margins of Scrivener.
Mm,
A lot of times I'll be writing, driving a car somewhere, listening to music, and I'll get this idea for the dialogue, and it's going back and forth in my head because I'm bored, and I'll go, that's pretty good. I need to write this down. And the next time I'm at a streetlight, boom, out comes the Post-it, and I'm scrambling to write dialogue. And then
Right.
finally, my best dialogue scenes end up basically being me grabbing these random notes from different places and these random Post-its and stringing together the conversation.
Right. And I will say thank goodness for text to speech and all that stuff in the modern phones, because
You know,
sometimes you can't.
doing dialogue is the only time I ever use speech to text.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I am struggling with something, I will just say it out loud and capture it with the various tools that I have at my disposal,
Yeah.
and then fix it up.
Yeah.
Because when you're saying natural words and having, for instance, an emotional conversation where you may not, be speaking perfectly eloquently, it works out. I mean, it really comes out more realistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say listening is very important. Immerse yourself in conversations. Listen to what people are actually saying. As a contemporary YA writer, my first draft of my first book had dialogue that by the time it was ready to be published had already been outdated by new lingo that kids were coming up with. So I did a whole edit just of updating those words that had fallen out of favor. So that's important too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure your
Yeah.
character.
When I read an old science fiction story that has, oh, she's the bee's knees.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And this is like a 1940s story that's supposed to be set in the 27th century. And,
All right.
Yeah, I love those old Highland books.
Yeah, fiction is going to eventually sound like that too.
And if you can't, if you can't immerse yourself, if you're not like me, you're not in college, you're not surrounded by, young people, or maybe you're writing a book about the South and you don't live in the South, then at least make sure that you're watching movies, you're reading literature from the South. Make sure that you're really immersing yourself into that for authenticity's sake.
Hey, TikTok is your friend, man. That's where the young folks are.
Or have a SME that can roll on the floor laughing and then correct you.
Well, actually, having the appropriate beta readers for it.
Oh yeah.
It's like I don't write YA, but if I was writing YA, I'd have a target audience be reading that and giving me feedback associated with things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let me make one last point. If you are not monologuing, you're already ahead of most new writers. So that is important. Make sure that you're not having paragraphs of dialogue. It should be short, crisp dialogue.
Oh, that is a very good point. That's a very good point. But it does kind of bring me up to another topic. Should your book actually start with dialogue?
No. I'm going to say,
I don't know. If it serves the story.
Let me give my argument. So I'm saying no. Actually, at one point, I believe yes. I've converted. I've had a spiritual revelation. One time I was like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting hook, to start with a character saying, damn it, where's my whatever. But the issue is that your readers have not been introduced to these characters, so it really is just like a floating dialogue bubble in the air when they read that first line. It's not, I wouldn't say it's the worst hook. It's a medium hook in my opinion, but a better hook is using action, especially like action that has a nice audible attachment to it. Like, he jumped off the bus and gravel crunched beneath his feet. I can immediately hear that. I can kind of see movement there. That's a better way to start for me. So I would say avoid it, but I'm interested in hearing the arguments to the counter. So what do you guys think?
It's to you, Marty. Go for it.
I think whatever serves the story best. And when you're talking about the very first sentence, the very first page of the story, those are really, really super important components of a book. And if you're going to open with dialogue, see what happens when a reader starts, they're in the dark to begin with, and fidelity comes in. And the thing is that if you're leading with dialogue, that dialogue has got to increase fidelity rapidly. So you have to be careful. I won't say never use it. I've never used it.
What do you mean by fidelity?
You see, what I mean by fidelity, painting the picture of the scene, of the environment, of the setting. I always find it problematic if I get through the first chapter and I can't tell if it's 1940 or 2659. That's very problematic for me. If I see dialogue right off the bat and I don't know if it's a man or a woman speaking, or if I don't know, is the guy 65 and decrepit, or 18 years old, and aroused. It's I need to know that.
But it's dangerous.
The story.
I think you can do it for effect. I just think you have to be careful.
Yeah.
So here's a story. I just made this up, but starting out with dialogue. Dying sucks, but it gets easier after you've done it a few times, I said.
Yeah.
Okay. If that doesn't get you to the second paragraph, I'm not sure what will.
Yeah, but I still think it'd be better if that were not in quotes. I think that would be better. If it was,
I think that's better inner speech anyway.
Yeah, I think it's better inner speech.
But I will say that
that was speech. That would
I think it's better inner speech.
Yeah,
no, saying it out loud, that is interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm totally going to steal it, man.
The next thing I want to know is who is speaking and who is he talking to? And how the heck has he died a number of times and is still talking to us, right?
Yeah. No, I mean,
the questions hanging right there.
Yeah, no, that is good. And I will say that some of my stories, like the Bière, s'il vous plaît, which I start in the Let's Kill John A. or John Wilkes Must Die. That's the first line. Ordering 2 beers in French. It's an interesting way to bring a book up. And I will admit that right now, the draft of Project Chronosphere, the first word you hear is merde. And then a description of why he exclaims merde.
That works as well for me, but then your mileage might vary.
Yeah, well, that's true. And it's the way I like it, but maybe nobody else does. So I will appreciate my feedback. But, inner speech, that is an interesting topic that I believe we should broach. Yes, it is not technically dialogue, except dialogue with yourself. But I will say this, if we do consider it, then when is it appropriate to use it?
Well, I've read a lot of really great books that have a lot of inner dialogue. Clockwork Orange, for instance. I love that book. Alex being the narrator of the book as you go through is really done wonderfully. So inner dialogue can be really important, really useful, especially if you have something like a unreliable narrator. That's can be a very interesting, very plot-worthy aspect. I use inner dialogue all the time in my books, because the POV that I use is third person, but close on one POV. So I'm inside one person's head, but nobody else's head.
Yeah.
And it's
very
a good
good
useful tool when used sparingly and used appropriately to have, you can tell what he's thinking. He may be saying one thing, but he can be like, scared shitless inside his head or whatever.
Very good.
So it's a really useful tool.
I second the use sparingly, especially in close third person.
Yeah.
I think it's for those special moments when a character wants to comment on something. Like the building just blew up by accident, and he says to himself basically, well, that didn't go as planned, right?
Right. And the thing is it helps develop the voice of that character. It develops the character himself. or herself. And it can be a really valuable tool. So I really like using inner dialogue.
I
But
feel like that happens more often in third person. I don't often switch from a first person narrative to a direct italicized thought. I don't know if I ever do that, and rather than just use it in narrative. So I would say it's a strictly
No,
third person.
I'm not saying that.
I
Yeah,
do it sparingly. I think honestly that if you're doing it a lot, then maybe you should be writing the book in first person and not third person.
Right.
And then
Right.
if that person is telling the story, and you can still have a first person unreliable narrator.
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely.
It's a special exercise when you do, but it can be fun.
Yes.
A third person unreliable narrator, you said?
No, first person.
First person unreliable
I
narrator.
find that even easier than doing a third person unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
there's an Agatha Christie novel featuring Hercule Poirot, which is written in first person by the killer.
Mm,
Right, and the last bit of the story is Hercule saying to him, "Don't you think it's time for us to end this charade? We both know who the murderer is." Right.
right.
Thanks
So-
for the spoiler, man.
I did tell you, but the unreliable narrator is something cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say one other interesting thing, but I'd hate to put any of our panelists on the spot, is writing women versus men, and maybe a little more inner speech for one of them, maybe more for women. I don't know. I mean,
No,
No,
no?
I don't buy
see-
that.
I don't see any
Characters are
difference.
characters. Differentiating them based on genetics, forget it. I just don't do that.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's why I bring it up. Why I bring it up. We're here to discuss these things. But I want to say a more fundamental question. Inner speech, single quotes or italics?
Italics.
I always do italics.
Italics.
It's the
I
only
would
thing
agree.
I use italics for, except like spaceship names.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
there's a rule of
Emphasizing.
thought. There is a rule of thought that says you should never do italics. That you should never do inner thoughts like that. And you know, the thing I say to those type of purists is, it works. Why would I take a tool out of my toolbox?
Yep. Yep. I mean, single quoted speech is very uncommon in modern literature. It is most always italics that is used to offset inner speech. And I'd say go with the convention. Sorry, guys, we moved on. Just like that double space thing. No, single space. HTML
I
made the
can't
rule.
say I've read a book. I read a couple books a week, and I haven't read a book in memory that uses single quotes for inner dialogue.
Well, so I got a couple of comments on that. First of all, UK books
Yeah,
were
it's
published
different.
with single quotes and not double quotes, so you get used to it pretty quickly. But that's a regional difference.
Hmm.
The other thing is that the different types of quotation marks have been used to represent different things, such as telepathy and stuff like that in science fiction novels. There's been no particular convention that's caught on, but I've seen things like pound signs used to mark the beginning and end of dialogue and stuff if it was telepathic and things of that nature. I tend not to do that either.
Hmm.
Right. Whatever you do, you just got to be consistent all
Absolutely.
the time.
Absolutely. Be consistent. And your editor will probably change it if you did the wrong thing. The editor will just say, oh, man, that bloke, he was just doing all the British things. And really, we're supposed to do not italics. We're supposed to do single quotes. Come on. Why did he do it that? Oh, that's why he's an American.
I've had some fun in some other stories, though, where some military fiction where the characters are talking, and if they're talking, it's in straight text, but if they're hearing somebody over the radio, for example, it's italicized. So I could instantly mix in a dialogue from people who are on the radio and people who were present in person, and the reader could instantly know which was which. But I had to establish those rules very early on and be consistent throughout the story. Again, that's a special case.
Right.
Yeah. And in fact, whatever you use it for, just be consistent.
Be consistent. That's perfect advice there, Marty.
Because I'm reading the book you recommended last week, the Graveyard Sky. Is that the title of it?
Under the
John Ringo.
Graveyard Sky.
And My Face is Red Again. And he does a lot of comm traffic, and he doesn't use any kind of special, case like that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we're talking about John Ringo, the first book in his Black Tide Rising series, which is Under a Graveyard Sky.
Hmm.
Zombies and military fiction. It's good stuff.
Yeah, fun stuff. I'm just like eating that up. I'll probably finish it tomorrow.
Very cool.
Well, there's more.
Jeffrey, before you close, I just want to
Well,
have a last comment.
Yeah,
Or do you have another topic?
I do have another topic.
Okay, all right, I'll say it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well
Go
then,
ahead.
yeah, because this last topic is just pretty much, what are some tips
Oh,
for
okay.
writing good dialogue?
I guess I'll just say what I was going to say then. It's not really a tip, it's just a comment that writing dialogue is one of the hardest things to master and a very hard thing to teach. It's really one of those elements of writing that needs to just be practiced, and you have to sharpen your ears and immerse yourselves, and with practice you'll get better. So be patient, keep writing, keep practicing.
Yeah, I think dialogue is one of the things that differentiates one author from the other. The way they write, the way people talk, and the cadence of the speech, the length of the sentences, and how that all sorts out really differentiates the voice that your books take on. And I think it's really important to learn how to vary your dialogue based on the personality of the characters. Actually make sure that they're different. I've had characters that curse a lot just because of who they are, and they always, use an F-bomb in every sentence that they use just to embarrass people and stuff. And other people that are quiet, and but even though they're quiet, they may be more lethal than the guy that swears all the time.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that, and now let you speak, David? Sorry, but just piggybacking on what Marty was saying about his character is cursing a lot. One of my pet peeves is that if you are a more conservative writer, and in your life you don't use curse words, and you're a little cleaner, that does not excuse you from making your villain speak squeaky clean, or your character from the ghetto, speak. It's not realistic. So I've seen writing friends that would say, oh no, I'm not going to write that word because I don't say that word. And I say, but your character does. Your character probably would. So that's no excuse. I'm not going to give you any leeway. I don't know how to end this rant with a free pass. I'm not going to give it. You have to be real at all times.
Totally real.
I'm going to jump on this then. Part of what I think you need to do is listen to how people really talk, and look for some variety. Think about your friend. I have a friend who's bombastic, funny, interesting. He's always like the center of attention because it's something he craves. How does he talk? If you want a character like that in your story, imitate some of those mannerisms. How about your friend who's kind of a wallflower, who doesn't speak much, but when she does, she comes out with the killer comment that just floors everybody, right? You can capture that kind of stuff just by listening to how real people talk. Use contractions. I've seen writers that write a bunch of dialogue and there's not a single contraction in it everywhere.
Yeah, guilty.
Yep.
That's always a revision modification I have to make in my books.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes it just comes across as, well, this is English the way your English teacher would have written it, but this isn't how people talk.
Right.
And I think people have said this before, loud or have Microsoft Office read it so that you can hear what it sounds like.
Reading it loud is great.
I have other tips, but I think we worked most of them into the previous questions.
My last comment is to be careful and sparing with accents, like adjusting your dialogue to make it phonetically sound like the accent. That can be kind of gimmicky and overdone. Maybe you can work it out. I think it was done pretty well by J.K. Rowling in the 4th Harry Potter book when a bunch of different international students came. So that might be an example if you're interested in doing that. But I think it might be a little better to just say he had he had an Iberian accent, or he had a Russian, whatever, rather than trying to.
There are tricks that you can use, actually.
There are some tricks that might be interesting.
If you know Well, if you know the language,
Be
Spanish-
cautious.
yeah, a Spanish person might drop the pronoun. A German might put the verb at the end of the sentence for some reason.
Oh yeah, no. So I don't mean that. I don't mean like, you know, I think that you should do that if that's arranging the words is different. I mean actually like sawing words in half. Like for example, I think that J.K. Rowling, instead of saying have, H-A-V-E, she would have her character from Eastern Europe say H-A-F-F, half. Which, you know, I think it worked okay, but don't overdo it, is what I'm saying.
Well, another example is the classic Scottish brogue.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
periodically suggest that the person, you know, write some dialogue that suggests a Scottish accent,
Mhm.
so that people realize, oh, this guy's Scottish, but don't overdo it
No.
because you want clarity above all.
And
Exactly.
be mindful of cliches there. I'll read a book. I read a book a couple of weeks ago. I will not mention because it was so cliche, and you know, depiction of like Southern rednecks and their accents was just like so bad. It's obviously whoever wrote this book was like from New York City and never actually spoke to somebody from Southern Alabama.
Yeah.
So watch that
yeah,
kind of cliche.
Just
cliche
because you
bullshit.
know 5 or 6 turn of phrases, believe me, they probably have 10 times that you have totally ignored. And just by using those 5 over and over and over again, you've just diminished the character's believability. Very cool. Good, good. Well, folks, I think we've had a positive discussion here. In fact, I would say it's another finely structured podcast. So thank you guys for coming, and see y'all
Another
next
great
time.
episode. Thanks for stopping by.